that would be great. At the end of the session, I'm going to send you all an email, and that email will have 4 handouts for you covering various topics that we've covered today. So you'll have that as a takeaway and a prompt to help you with your leadership teams. Okay, so with no more hesitation, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to start off the presentation today. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Lucy. Fabulous to see some familiar faces. It's great to have you here. Thank you. So one of the things we're going to kick off with is working through with leaders around their personal experiences of lockdown. And the reason for this is that each of us had such different experiences over lockdown. Some people were rested, reconnected with family, others lonely, lacking in confidence. Some people had been disconnected from the business as a result of being furloughed. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research that sits behind transitions like this in a business, transitions like redundancy, transitions like maternity, and the impact that that can have, and what organisations can do to help people bring almost re-onboard people back into the organisation. But I guess what we're asking leaders to understand at this point is that for a myriad of reasons, teams will not be the same when they come back into the business. And therefore, we're going to ask teams to safely do some exploration with their teams around what that personal experience was, simply so that they can build on it. In terms of moving us back towards high performance, and Nikki's going to talk a bit more about this in a moment, the reality is that leaders need some empathy of understanding what they need to build back from. So some people have been running through meadows with their children, and others have had lonely experiences over lockdown, or they've faced grief, or they've faced illness. So one of the first things that we want to do is to understand what that situation was and to build on it. So I'm actually just going to ask you in the chat, if you can, to describe your own lockdown experience just in 2 words. I ran this session with a group of leaders yesterday, and roller coaster kept coming up. It was unbelievable. So even for those people who were reconnecting either with their family or their partner, they were also dealing with probably a level of stress at work, or a level of stress with a relative. Busy and contemplative. Thanks for that, Marianne. I will not forgive the fact that you wrote down a hard word. Refocus, energize, wonderful. Working and teaching. So I think I actually could have coped in a hugely different way had I not have had the teaching. And one child in particular who had everything online and was sort of beautifully catered for, and then one child who, was actually, reasonably challenging. So I guess we can see from that you've got things like roller coasters, you've got stressful, but you've also got slower, fulfilled, refocus, energize. So there's a huge amount to build on with leaders. And what we're asking is that people take the time to recognize that, to empathize with it, and then to build on it. And what each of the sections that we talk you through today are going to be different ways of doing that, or different tools to work with your leaders on. So I'm going to hand over to Nikki, and she's going to spend a bit of time on our first tool, and that is resilience.
Thanks, Alex. So looking at the words that you have all put down, it's really interesting to see the words you've used to explain your experiences. And as we can see, those words have been different depending on how you have probably transitioned over this year through the pandemic at different rates, different experiences, and in different situations. So some of you have been working, teaching, it's been a roller coaster, it's been challenging, or it's been change. So in order for people to become more resilient and adaptable in these circumstances, we need to help people make sense of their experiences. This is absolutely intrinsic in recovery to help people become high performing. So thinking about the words you've used, and over the last few months, you'll have experienced different levels of emotions, behaviours and performance. And how you've experienced that is closely linked to your hormones. Your biochemicals in your body have stimulated in different ways due to different things, due to different experiences you've had. And our mood has a direct link to our behaviour and our performance. And the diagram I'd just like to show you now puts that into real insight of what that means into practice. So looking at the diagram, over the last few months, you will have operated over all of those 4 zones. So looking at the words you use, from teaching to frustrating, to being slow, to challenging, to being really busy. What this map actually shows is the key to long-term resilience is being able to access the right-hand side of that map, but then being mindful of the left-hand side of that map and looking at and thinking about tactical tools that you can use to make sure you stay out of the left-hand side and continue to stay in the right-hand side. So just to give you a bit more context of that mood map, if we look at, first of all, at the green zone. So the green zone is what you'd know as high performing. It's where you feel energized, productive, you're engaged. It's where we perform at our best. Then looking at the yellow zone. The yellow zone is where we recalibrate, we chill, we relax, we rest and have relaxation. This is absolutely vital for us to go into that zone so that we can continue to operate within the green zone. It's really important you do spend time there. Then some of the time you may have gone into the red zone. The red zone is where it's our stress zone. It's known as our flight or fight. I'm sure you're all aware of it. This is where your stress hormones will be at full max, where this will come out in your feelings, your behavior, and your performance. And then finally, there's something called the gray zone. This is our exhausted zone. So this is where we've spent so much time in the red zone that our whole body says, I've had enough. I cannot cope anymore. I'm low, I've got no energy. And sometimes this is where mental health issues can start occurring. So just thoughtful of that. So what I'd like you to do is thinking about your personal experience, the words you used and what's been going on with you over the last year. What percentage of time have you been spending in that zone? What has this meant for your well-being and your resilience? What's it meant for your behaviours, your thoughts and your performance? So just take a moment looking at that grid. Think about where you spent your time and what has that meant for you. And while you do that, I'd like to share my example of where I was. So at the beginning of the year, I was in the green zone. Work was going really, really well. Celebrated some birthdays, booked some holidays, booked some adventure trips, was so excited. And then, as we all know, March, April, lockdown hit. So for me, being a self-employed consultant, the first thing that hit me was I lost all my work. It meant I had no income. Started to get a bit stressful. What am I going to do? Then my auntie was already in hospital. We got told that there was COVID in her ward, that we had to get her out as fast as possible. So again, I started another thing threw at me. And then probably to top it off, my mum and dad were in Spain. Spain was in lockdown. And due to medical reasons, we needed to get my mum and dad out as fast as possible. So all of that, one thing after another, I could feel my behaviour, my mood started pushing me into that red zone. And I knew it. I could feel it with my emotions. So I needed to take action pretty quick. So what I started to do was think about, okay, how can I get myself out of this? The first thing I went to was my energy. And I'll come on to what I mean by that. Is I started to look at, okay, I need to think about my diet, my sleep. I need to make sure I get some good night's sleep and have the right diet. And as a lot of people did, I joined the Joe Wicks fan club and started doing lots of exercises, joined his diet plan. I also spent more time walking and thinking about meditation and things like that. That helped me to really get my body and my mind back in the right place. I then started to look at, okay, what goals can I do? If I haven't got a job, I haven't got any work, what can I do? So I started doing a new qualification. Like everybody else, I did a bit of DIY and turned it back into a summer lounge, and then also just started doing volunteering. So those are some of the things that I did. Alex, you can just go back one slide. So what I'd like you to do is thinking about that grid, thinking about what you've experienced over the last few months. What things have you put in place to help you stay on the right-hand side of the grid? And what ways of working can you put in place to help manage your mood map? So if you'd like to just share on chat now, some of the things that you've done to help make sure you stay on that right-hand side of the grid. Not sure if anything's coming through. So exercise, goal setting, yeah. A lot of people have found over the last couple of months that probably Joe Wicks has been their lifesaver. They've lost weight, done a lot of exercise. Anybody else got any other ideas? Workspace. Space is really important to make sure you get your own time and separate your work and your home space. So if you're working from home and you're remote working, it's really, really important to get those two separate spaces. Exercise, walking dog, making new connections, really important to talk things through to help your resilience and your well-being, and add structure to your day. We need to have purpose and identity. And one of the key things is making sure that you have structure that you can follow that through. And don't talk about COVID 24 hours, totally agree. There's a time and a place. We need to get away from things. So all those things you've talked about are you keep accepting, yeah, it's not for long, change will happen, yeah, absolutely. I always have a great mantra with my mother and say that things don't last forever, and you can take that in two ways. Things won't always last forever, it's positive and a negative. So picking up on a lot of the things you talked about there, they are a key element of what is known as resilience. And there is 5 pillars of resilience. And with resilience, we mean that bounce back ability, that ability to deal with adversity and come out the other side. So I'd like to share with you what is known as the 5 pillars of resilience. And those are really important in helping your well-being. So the first one being energy. Energy is the foundation pillar to resilience. And what I mean by that is if you don't have the right sleep, the right diet, the right exercise, the right mindset, it'll have a knock-on effect to you being able to think about your other pillars. So to be more resilient, to help with your mood map, a lot of you picked up on it, it's energy. Think about how well are you sleeping? What is your diet like? Is it a balanced diet? Are you drinking too much, eating too much? What exercise are you doing? And things like mindfulness, walking, meditation, taking dogs for the walk, having hobbies. And also in energy is barriers. So having time out to making sure that you've got a personal life and a work life, and especially when remote working, shutting that door from work and being able to have your life in your own home. Future focus. This is about goal setting and self-discovery. So making sure we think about, okay, what do I want from the future and what goals am I going to set myself? Really important to make sure that you understand where the future is going, especially in this very challenging time, because that will help your resilience. Flexible thinking. Again, just to make sure you stay on the right-hand side of the grid, really think about that creative problem solving and decisions. What else can I do to help me move forward and be high performing? And your inner drive. In these, I have found over the last 6 months, probably my inner drive of what I want out of life has changed. And some of you may have felt that as well. So what are now your personal drivers, your ambitions, your personal well-being? What's important to you to get you up in the morning? And then finally, strong relationships. Some of you mentioned that you'd go out, you'd network, maybe think about coaching, mentoring, doing some walk and talks. And what I mean by that is walking and talking over a telephone call, not Zoom all the time. So think about other ways to connect with people which will help with your resilience. So all of those things that you've talked about, the 5-pillar resilience, will really help you to make sure that you use that mood map effectively. Because remember, that mood map is not just about the pandemic, it's about everyday life. So whether it's a positive or negative, challenging work or home personal situation, you will move around that map. And it's for you to think about how you can be the most resilient and high performing you can be. So for a takeaway, just to sort of think about your wider team, I'd like you to think about what this means for your team. What behaviours have you seen, whether it's your peers, your colleagues, or your reports? Where have they been on the grid? And thinking about what I've shown you today with that grid and the 5 pillars of resilience, what support can you give them to help them to move to the right-hand side so that you and your team can become high-performing in this continuing challenging environment that we find ourselves in? So before I hand over to Alex, Marianne, is there any questions? Come on.
Not so far, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to Alex, who's going to talk about the research of returning to work.
Thank you, Nikki. So we talked briefly earlier around the fact that essentially what people are going through is a transition. To some extent, regardless of where they are in the organisation or whether they've been furloughed or whether they're working from home, a transition is what we're going through. And most of the research on transitions is driven by redundancy or maternity. So people who have taken a break, there's been an actual transition from work to a different environment. My guess is there will be a lot of research around pandemics over the next few months and years. But at the moment, that's the kind of research we've got to go on. And I guess one of the things we're suggesting is that you run things like the resilience exercise with your teams so that you have got this understanding of what transition they are making that allows you to build on it as you move back towards high performance. The research around transitions is that some support is needed by organisations. So there's 2 types of research, and one is what an individual can do, and we've talked a little bit about how you can help yourselves from a resilience perspective. The next part of the focus is really how leaders can help, how the organisation can help people to make that transition. Interestingly, the research says that people don't want too much support. So they want to be able to own their transition and not be smothered or not be seen to be different to anybody else, but still that there is some support required to get people back on into something that is different. So a lot of the research in the transitions is about a lack of self-efficacy or self-confidence or self-esteem as you return into work. And it doesn't take long, but what the research is showing is that there is some onboarding required for that transition. And really that's what we're going to focus on as we move through the rest of the session today. So one of the key elements for us that we believe passionately in, but we think is often overlooked by managers, is psychological safety. So through both psychology and neuroscience, the role of psychological safety has been popularised more recently. It was tended to be a construct of occupational psychology before then, but it's now very closely linked to individuals' high performance. We are fortunate that there's been lots of research by organisations like Google and Microsoft that I'll talk you through in a minute that provides a much more mainstream approach to psychological safety. But we firmly believe that you cannot achieve high performance in a team without it. And in particular around transitions, and when we asked many of you what your biggest challenges were at the moment, a couple that really stand out are that the retail environment is challenging at the moment, that we're dealing with resilience, but then we've got change layered on top. So there's some really complex situations out there. And for many of you, actually, it's just about working remotely. And we want to talk to you about psychological safety and some ways which people can support that in their own organisation. So just to be clear, psychological safety is when an individual's sense of belonging is threatened and fear is impacted, and it reduces the brain's ability to work normally. The appalling example I always give when Nikki and I deliver this to groups, Nikki's going to eye roll me, is I took my children to a Victorian day and they all had to sit on those old-fashioned desks, and the lady had a cane, and anybody who was naughty had these finger things put on that meant that they couldn't fiddle with their hands. And this kind of normally very self-confident, happy-go-lucky group of children sat down, and the teacher had a cane and shouted at them and said, "You need to do your alphabet." So one child says A, next desk along child says B, and then the next child's so scared that they said F. And the teachers are at the back thinking, what is happening? I know you all know your alphabet. And an appalling example, so forgive me, but a perfect example of a group of people, children in this case, who felt unsafe. And therefore your brain doesn't work in the same way. So it leads to less emotional intelligence, it leads to diminished decision making, and it leads to diminished innovation and creativity. So, as I said, very fortunate that there's been some great research, and in the handouts, all of this research is included for you. But one of the things that Google said, and in fact, so did Microsoft, but in a slightly different way, is that they firmly believe that no team is high performing unless they have psychological safety at its foundation. So in other words, I feel like I can come to work, I can bring my whole self to work, I can challenge when I need to, and I can be honest and vulnerable when I need to. The other things that Google mentioned, they came up with 5, was dependability. So they need to be able to depend on people around them to do what they need to do, which would make lots of sense to most of us. Structure and clarity. I understand what I need to do and the structure within which I can complete that task. There is meaning to my work and impact. Team members think that their work matters and it creates change. So all of those seem to make loads of sense. And we've been talking about those as leaders for years and years, but psychological safety is absolutely at the ground of being able to build on a team to create high performance. Microsoft, theirs was the art of teamwork, and essentially their foundation was that people could bring their full selves to work. And we're in a place now where that is very difficult for people to do. Some people are concerned about, are they going to be made redundant? Are they really able to bring their full selves to work? So in terms of translating that to your environments, one of the things that we're suggesting is it's worth thinking about, can we take risks on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? And if not, how do we do that? One of the things, having spent lots of time researching psychological safety and lots of time writing about it, one of the things that stuck with me the most was replace blame with curiosity. And some people, when we deliver this, they'll say to us, I can't control this. I'm not in a psychologically safe business, but you can control it within your own team and you can control it within your peer group. So even if small parts are done, it enables the wider organization to understand. And we acknowledge that quite often the wider organization requires a cultural intervention, and we get that. So think about a time when you felt psychologically safe, and what does that do to you? How does it make you feel? So I am a board director for an oil trading firm in the city, and I am on a board that is incredibly challenging. We have very robust debates, but I feel hugely psychologically safe. So I will often say to them, I don't understand what you just said. It was mass trading acronyms, or it was, related to a fuel Brent crack increase. And I will stop them and say, I add value on the people side. We create a culture that allows people to thrive. And that's the value I add. I don't understand everything. I'm not a completely perfect individual. And so therefore I feel that, I want to be able to be vulnerable, and then they help me. I equally help them on some of the parts that are more complex for them. So we are providing you with a handout at the end of this session, and essentially what it gives you is a few tips around your own team. So in particular in remote working, it's worth resetting the context. It's worth saying to people, it's okay to ask questions. I know this is an unusual time. I know that this is, there's a lot of change. I know there's a lot of uncertainty. Let's take 30 minutes out and have an honesty amnesty. We did this with a client recently. I admit you need to be careful around that. Having done this recently with a client, we did have somebody on there who said, I don't want to share, and that's okay too. We suggest keep talking, over communicate in a remote environment, communicate as much as you can. On our last webinar, I talked about the fact that I've looked everywhere for research that proves that you have to say something 7 times. I can't find it, but I still believe in it. There's got no evidence base at all. But telling somebody something once is not enough. And we can see that from the mixed messages around COVID. So keep reinforcing that same message to people. It becomes much easier. Create a virtual social support. So sometimes as a leader, maybe step back and create a peer environment for them to share. Keep saying thank you, celebrating small successes that reinforce behaviours. And I know that we talked about this a lot on the last webinar. We are unashamed about the fact that we insist on celebrating success and reinforcing behaviours. Because then when you move into a radical candor environment and you want to talk to people about the fact that they are not delivering, that's much easier when you've done some of the reinforcement. So for us, psychological safety is absolutely fundamental in terms of creating high performance teams. There are small ways that you can impact that at the moment. So to give you one example, we are running an innovative session. We have sent ahead, forgive me for this, scented candles, wheatgrass shots, and a pack of innovative images, and then a brief that is for the exploration meeting. And we've asked them to take an hour out, light their candle, drink their shot of wheatgrass juice, not tequila, and then spend some time prepping. So we are asking people to create space for that innovative thinking. So creating safety in teams is for us absolutely fundamental. There's 2 articles for you in the handout, and there's also our tips sheet around creating small things that will enable your environment to be more psychologically safe.
Alex?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to, there's a really good question come in from Victoria. It's quite a long one. I don't know if you can see chat.
I can't, but let me have a look. So I can see even by the first sentence, Victoria, I know what this question is going to say. I completely agree. So I'm assuming everybody can see the chat, but in a sense, initially a sense of novelty. Actually, the session I had yesterday, genuinely, we talked about having to dig a lot deeper actually than previous, than what people were doing previously, where we had sessions in for pause, we had sessions in for weekly sessions. And actually, for me, I know Lucy said this at the beginning, more than ever, things like the psychological safety are going to be absolutely crucial, and the resilience piece. And the session I had yesterday, people were saying, I don't have time for this. Do you think my life should be about self-care strategies right now? And, intellectually, I think we all understand that we need to be on the right-hand side of the grid. And if anybody knows the Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi people in flow model, you'll know that a lot of the research is about having the right amount of challenge and the right amount of skill and being able to be in that top right-hand corner. And we are going to have to dig a lot deeper over the period of the next few months. And we are going to have to be much more meaningful about the progress we make on things like psychological safety, on things like resilience. I think they can't be statements. They have to be genuinely real interventions that organizations need to create culturally. Again, one of the, for us, this is about you having exercises to take back to your leaders, but actually leaders have got to role model this first, this resilience piece and the psychological safety piece before they take it back into teams. So I think, Victoria, I think we're going to talk a bit more as we go on. So I'm going to keep moving and then nudge me for anything that you don't believe we've covered. So the next thing that we wanted to pick up on was some particular leadership behaviours, and hopefully this will support this piece that you're talking about, Victoria, about the need for us all to dig quite deep now over the next few months. So when Nikki and I have delivered this before, people eye roll us on empowerment, and people will say, empowerment is either a loss of control on my part or it's a 1980s buzzword. And there is a real view that in order to empower people, I have to let go. And actually, Nikki and I feel quite strongly that that's not the case. And that actually empowering people in an environment like this, in particular remotely, provides more control. And we want to explain why. And then Nikki's then going to go on to talk about coaching behaviours around the way you can get most out of people. So again, a real Flint pillar is around providing clarity. And we talked about this on our last webinar, and creating this absolute clarity for people around what they need to achieve. And we talked about the Mila roadmap, and I know there's also some people on here who will be eye rolling me. And that's about ensuring that people have absolute clarity in terms of what they need to achieve. SMART goals, forgive me, a little bit 80s, OKRs, whatever it looks like, a roadmap. People can see where we're going. And again, in particular, in changing landscapes, people understand the direction and then are able to see right down to their individual objectives what that means. And Nikki and I spend a lot of time with leaders working through how do you break that down into measures? What does good look like in each of those areas? And everybody understanding the part you play. So if you can then provide that level of clarity, you actually have quite a lot of control around what that person needs to achieve. You don't need to micromanage them daily to know what they're doing because you're managing them on an outcomes basis. We talked a lot last time as well about empowering your teams to then create and deliver the plan that falls down from the main plan. People are experts in what they do, and their voice is absolutely crucial to delivering because they will be the ones telling you where there's an obstacle. And there's an article that Flint wrote for the Risk Coalition recently around you psychologically, you want to hear the stories that you don't want to hear. This is your opportunity to listen to people, empower them, and to say, well, actually, the landscape is changing, or my client is saying this, and for you to be able to listen and then to react to that in your plan. And then lastly, creating a culture of communication. So again, a nice buzzword. Let me give you an example. We worked with a client recently where we have changed their performance management system to be 6 weekly. So the research around empowerment says empowerment's a really great concept and construct, providing managers don't say, here you go, Bob, here's all this great empowerment stuff. And essentially you just give Bob your objectives. And some of the research says, actually, it's just too much. I've got too much on and I'm not in a position to deal with that. And that's what causes some of the stress, which moves you into that red box on the resilience mood map. And what we're saying is, if you're speaking to people every 4 to 6 weeks and you have a much more agile performance management system, those meetings will probably be shorter. You can increase your psychological safety because you can be more honest with people about where you are. You can talk about things like change layered onto that resilience. You can manage the remote working much easier. So a lot of what we're doing with clients at the moment is this much more regular and agile performance management sessions, not twice a year, not even once a quarter, much more regularly talking about where people are, going right back to that number one point, that clarity that you've provided. So we called it the dance floor last time. We see that your role as a leader or as HR professionals in an organization is to set the dance floor, set the boundaries, create the clarity, but then let them dance how they like. If some people want to tango, that's okay. And if some people want to jive, that's okay. But don't keep running onto the dance floor and saying, how's everyone doing? Just checking out what you've managed to finish today. Just let them dance. Providing you've done your job correctly and you've set the right boundaries of the dance floor, that should start to create that safer culture. So any questions on that before I hand back to Nikki, who's going to talk to you about some coaching elements around making this really real?
None on the chat yet, Alex.
Okay, I am going to keep us moving then.
Thanks, Alex. So as Alex said, we talked about empowering, we've talked about picking up, making sure they've got that psychological safety. And I just want to pick up on Victoria's point around what effects do we have, and I'll move that into coaching. There's a huge amount of research in relation to what's going to be happening with people's emotions and people's mental well-being over the next couple of months. And I'm sure it won't be a surprise to any of you, there is great concern in the mental health hospital and industry that this is going to have a dramatic impact, especially with the announcements over this week in Wales, England and Scotland, that this is now going to threaten people's well-being to another level. So in relation to your question, Victoria, I think what we're going to see, if you go back to the mood map, is we're going to see people quickly go into the red or grey zone. Reason being is the red, they will get frustrated, as many people have been, with the messages, what's going on. One minute you told us to go and work in the offices, now you're telling us to work at home again. So people are going to get frustrated. They're going to be frustrated, and they potentially will start getting change fatigue. Change fatigue because as organisations, we're asking them to carry on to do their work and we want them to continue, but also change fatigue from the COVID pandemic of now we've got to change, now we've got to do this, now we've got to do that. So what will happen is people will become either psychologically unsafe because they're not sure, as Alex said, but they've got the job, but also for their own mental well-being around their family, what's going to happen, there's too much change going on. So in addition to Alex talking about the empowerment and making sure that you make them feel psychologically safe, another key element of a leadership behaviour is coaching. And I'm sure you all have a preferred coaching framework, or you may use some type of structure. The two probably most well-known coaching frameworks are GROW by Whitmore, which is Goal, Reality, Options, Will. Or some of you may have heard of a coaching model called OSCAR, which is very similar. It's called Outcome, Situation, Choices, Actions, and Review. Now, with those two frameworks, to help people get through these challenging times and to help them be more empowered and to help them feel more psychologically safe, using these frameworks will help those conversations. And I'm sure when you're using these frameworks, you try to make sure you spend the most appropriate time in the right coaching area. What I mean by that is when we're having a coaching conversation, we will have go across a spectrum of coaching, whether it's from giving advice to asking lots of questions. Now that's going to depend on the experience, skill and capability of the person you're coaching, your team member, your colleague. But within those frameworks, I'd like to share some coaching tips that I have found extremely useful to get the most out of the coaching sessions and to really help the person I'm coaching. So as you can see on the slide, so the first one is start with what's on your mind. It's a great opening question. It invites people to say what's really going on at the heart of what they're thinking, and to make sure that it shows that you trust them and give them autonomy to make the choice of what they want to talk about. So really go straight in with that so that you have an open floor and they can talk about anything they want to. Second, and what else question, such a powerful question, can be used at 2 points of your coaching structure. So the first point I'd use it at is when you're thinking about the reality, the situation, what's going on for them, it helps create insight and greater self-awareness. So when they're talking about the situation, you can say, well, what else is going on? And the second time that it's really useful to use it is when it's either about the choices or the options. So widening the possibilities, really pushing them to what else could they do, what else might you think about implementing to whatever the goals they're trying to achieve. Third one is using focused questions. To me, this is a really important of active listening and really find out what's going on. So listening to the words they use and really get into that depth. So at the moment they might say, everybody is doing this. So who is everybody? So really picking up on their generalizations or their assumptions to help them challenge their thought process, whether they're feeling psychologically unsafe or whether they're really finding it difficult in this challenging environment at the moment. So really pinpoint down so that you can really get into the detail of what's going on for them. The next one is help get clarity on what they really want. This is essential when you're using coaching structures to set up what is the goal they really want. So sometimes we say, oh, I just want this, but we don't really know the in-depth of what we want. So really probing into the goals of what they're trying to achieve is important, because when you, as you all probably know from using coaching, if you don't get the goal right, when it comes to what the options and whether they're going to do it, they won't, because it's not really what they want. So make sure you spend time on getting that clarity for them. Next one is check what support they need. So asking, how can I help? Now this stops you from thinking you know the best way to help them move forward and leaping into action. Because don't forget, it's them that needs to find the answer. You don't know what will be best for them. So making sure you ask how you can help and support them also shows that you're supportive, you're helping them, and that you're going to win this together. And then finally, helping them to learn. The key about all of this, and especially with resilience, is helping people understand the meaning of the experience and putting it into their long-term memory. That's how you become more adaptable, more strong in your resilience. So make sure when you are coaching them, help them to learn. So what was most useful for you? What did you learn? What's important to capture? What do you want to remember from this situation? Will really get the most out of the experience they've had so that they can become high-performing and more resilient. So those are just some, I think, a real key tips to help you structure your coaching and to help people through this change and becoming more empowered and more psychologically safe. Now, in the read and listen handouts, there is a summary of those key messages to help you reflect on your coaching skills, but also to help you reflect on the 5 pillars of resilience and how you can maybe focus some of your coaching on helping build each of those pillars of resilience for people. So unless there's any questions, I will hand over to Lucy to close the webinar.
No questions at this stage, Nikki.
Okay, thank you.
Unless somebody's frantically typing, don't think so.
No, there is. Carla did make an observation though. It's probably just worth picking up, and that was, I think, in response to what you were talking about, Alex, around the dance floor. So Carla said it was a really interesting point. Some leaders in a business that she works with have a different view on the dance floor, so it's proving interesting. I don't know if you've got any observation on that, Alex.
Yes, and in fact, on the session that we ran last time, we talked about, so sort of point 1 is getting everybody clear. So we've designed a toolkit for businesses to help them get really clear. And so that does cause different sets of psychological safety. And I guess if you're not in a position to get that dance floor clarified so that everybody agrees, I guess then you have to be clear on the 2 separate dance floors. And, you know, that is about being clear on, sometimes we had this where you have a matrix report. So I report into one person, but I have a dotted matrix reporting into somebody else so for me, that was in Germany, for example. And quite often they would have different agendas. And so then it's just about these really frank conversations around what's my clarity with you, and let me be clear on the difference. So we do a bit of work on radical candor, you know, having really honest conversations. And this is a big part around the psychological safety, as well as creating trust by being as transparent as possible and saying, this is my situation, you know, this is my reality, let me provide clarity on that. The other option, which we always say to people, is coach your manager, is, you know, coach those people. So, you know, can I ask, you know, so you go through Grow, what I'm trying to achieve is a clarity on the same dance floor. And people always say, well, I could never coach my manager. But actually, I think it's a brilliant way of managing your manager, because it's much easier sometimes than some of that straight talking.
Great. Lovely. Thank you, Alex. If you've got any more questions, please do just drop them into the chat. But we're now coming to the end of our session this morning. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I do hope that you found some of the ideas that Alex and Nikki have covered to be useful and stimulating. Perhaps they've generated new ideas on things you could do, or perhaps they've reminded you of things that you've done in the past that you might need to re-implement again. There's a number of things that we're suggesting that you do with the information we've covered today. We're suggesting that you could and should walk through the resilience exercises that Nikki took you through earlier, and do those with your leadership team. We think they'd find that very useful. You should spend some time considering ways to increase the psychological safety of your teams and taking any actions that are needed there. Make sure that you are providing clarity on what is expected of people. Give them autonomy, but do make sure that you're building in regular check-ins, that they are supported and feeling heard. And then finally, make sure that you're taking a coaching approach with your teams. That's the points that Nick has just covered, particularly making sure you're asking the right questions of them, particularly the what else, making sure that they're expressing everything that is going on in their heads. So just to confirm that there'll be an email from me coming out within the next hour. Do make sure that you check your junk in your inbox, because I won't have emailed you directly before, so it may not make it directly into your inbox. That email will have 4 handouts from us. One covering tips on psychological safety, one covering the 5 pillars of resilience, another covering the Oscar and Grow coaching models, and finally a reading list should you wish to investigate any of the areas in more detail. So just remains to thank you all for your time today. Just to reiterate that the material we've gone through today forms the basis of a more in-depth virtual workshop programme that we've put together. Those workshops cover in particular time to explore individual experiences, helping leaders to relate to their people, so looking at resilience and empathy, looking at the mood board and behavioural impacts that they may have, looking about the transition and talking specifically about psychological safety, making sure that the leaders are clear on the need to create alignment and clarity for their people, talking about empowerment, and then providing support, looking to make sure that people create these new behaviours as a habit, not just doing it once and forgetting about it, but continue to embed it and reinforce it. So if that programme is of interest to you, please do get back in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you about it in more detail. We are, as I said right at the start, this is the second in a series of webinars. We are currently looking to put together ones in the future on how to manage culture in a virtual working environment, again, very topical, and also something around customer experience, so slightly in a different area, but something equally important. If you've got any points of pain or burning issues that you think we could usefully cover in a webinar, please do let us know. And equally, if you think we could be of assistance to you and your organisation on a one-to-one basis, again, please feel free to get in touch with us. Any final questions from anybody before we close?
There's nothing in the chat, Lucy.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, look out for the email from me. Do get in touch if we can be of any assistance, or if you've got any ideas or any comments on how it went today. But other than that, thank you all very much for your time today and your involvement. We really appreciate it. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Shall I